So today, we are privileged to have here Holly Camponez, who graciously shares her insights and experiences with us. Holly, would you kindly introduce yourself?
Absolutely. First of all, a huge thank you, Hannah, for both inviting me to participate, but also for organizing this really incredible week full of content. I think this is something so special. We talk about branding. This is something so special from Avenue Code, this kind of continuous investment in learning and sharpening and helping all of our people rise to their best levels. So huge thank you to you for your work in organizing. I know this is not a easy endeavor, something you've been working on for many, many months. So thanks so
Yeah,
much. Yeah. And
thank
for
you.
those who don't know me, I'm Holly. I've been in the company for almost 8 years. I've held a lot of different roles in that time. Today, I'm the VP of Design and head of Adobe practice, and I live in the San Francisco Bay Area with my husband, my 2 kids, and my 3 feline kids.
Triple line. Oh, this is a challenge. Thank you
Cats.
so much, Holly. Let's start our conversation about talking about how do you define and articulate your unique value proposition when building a personal brand.
Absolutely. So, if you know me at all for any amount of time, you know that branding is my deep passion in life. It's the kind of work that when I get to do it, I just get so happy. The light comes in my eyes. There's nothing like talking about branding and doing branding work. So, why is that? It's interesting, right? Because when we talk about personal branding, usually we have something very specific in mind. We're thinking about like being a LinkedIn top voice or having a website with a lot of visitors. But I think it's really good just to rewind a little bit and understand what is a brand to begin with. A brand, whether it's personal or organizational, is simply an expression of who you are. At the organizational level, that really looks like doing a lot of research deeply to understand the values that the members of the organization hold, their mannerisms, what defines them, what's characteristic of them. You kind of work backward from the clues that you have to determine what's at the heart and what is the essence of what makes this organization who it is. And something that I always tell clients when we're doing branding work for clients is that you actually should think of it in terms of a personal expression of who you are. So when we talk about personal branding, I think rather than trying to take something corporate and think about yourself as a business, it's actually the same exercise. It's look within yourself, look deeply and understand what are those elements that make you who you are. That external factors might change, but what's at the core of you? So when we think about creating a personal brand, that really would be my first advice is look inside. And from there, you're going to start to define and articulate the unique value proposition that you have. How do you do that? There's a lot of different techniques to do it. One thing that I really love, there's a book written by Marcus Buckingham. He's one of the ones who collaborated with Don Clifton on the Strengths Finder test and book, for those of you who are familiar. He basically suggests that although most career advice centers around looking at where are you weak and where do you need to improve, if you take the opposite tactic and you start to evaluate what are the things in life, in your career, that light you up inside, that put a light in your eyes, that you're really, really good at, those are what he calls your red threads. Nobody's career and nobody's life is going to be made up entirely of red threads. But if you can look for those things and celebrate those things and find ways to capitalize them, those are going to give you really big clues about what your unique value proposition is. Because the reality is, of course, we can and should work on improving where we have opportunities to improve. But you kind of are who you are. You kind of have the interests that you have, the talents that you have. That's a natural thing that although it may evolve over your lifetime, some of those things are pretty just central to who you are. So start paying attention to what are those moments in your workday that you just absolutely love and you find yourself thinking, I can't believe I get to do this for a living. I can't believe this is part of my job. How lucky am I? And in your personal life too, right? Because maybe your career, maybe you may be in a moment that your career is not affording you a lot of opportunity to work with your red threads. So when it comes to identifying and articulating your unique value proposition, pay attention to what you love. And if you feel stuck, if you feel like you're out of touch with what you love, go back to who you were as a kid. What kind of games did you like to play? What did you pretend that you were going to be when you grew up? What did you care about? What kind of friends did you seek after? What kind of activities did you like to do? And then bring that forward into your life. The other thing too is sometimes we get blind spots about it. So I give this advice with caution, but ask people around you, what's my superpower? Where do you see that I really, really shine? That's a strange thing to do. That's hard for people to do, to ask for people to compliment them and notice and acknowledge their superpowers. But it's a really good exercise. Hopefully, you're going to get answers that might surprise you a little bit, but that they just intuitively feel right. And you can kind of go, yeah, okay, I am really good at that. Maybe I should do something with that. So I try to do this exercise every couple of years, asking peers and people I work closely with, what do you think my superpowers are? Pay attention to the answers that you get. Take them with a grain of salt because nobody knows you like you. But if you start there and you start by looking at what are those red threads in your life, what do you really love? That's going to give you a clue about where you are valuable. And then you start to weave that into your personal brand narrative of, you can count on me for X, Y, and Z. For me, I really love public speaking. So I have, as part of my value proposition, you can count on me to deliver a talk, any conference, anywhere in the world, anytime. I'm there. I love it. So think about, what are those things for you? What do you do that people consistently will come up and say, wow, you really nailed that? Those are the kind of things that is a big part of your value proposition.
Yeah, you really nail on public speaking. And there's one of the things that I really admire on you.
Thank you, Hannah.
And what strategies do you think individuals can use to authentically communicate their personal brand across the various platforms and channels and
Yes.
working from home?
Yeah. So I think authentically is such a key word here, right? Because when you think about a brand, again, it shouldn't feel like this is a fake story you're telling about yourself. It should feel like, how much of myself, my true self, my deepest self, the things that I love, am I willing to share with the world in this particular moment, in this particular channel? So I think it really starts with intentionality. It starts with articulating to yourself, what do I love, as we already spoke about, and also what are my values? Those on my team know I don't hire anybody without asking, what are your core values? Not what are you good at work per se, what kind of jobs do you like, what's your management style? No, what are your core values? What makes you who you are, no matter what else changes in the world? If you get clear on that for you, for yourself, everything that you do, you start every single day grounding yourself in your values, your personal values. It's going to be second nature then, that the way you show up in different conversations and different channels is going to be a reflective of that. And that is your personal brand, it's your values. It all starts from there. Milena is on the call with us, Milena Guimaraes. She recently is helping us to rebrand .design. And I think it's interesting when we do a branding exercise for an organization or for a client. They usually start out saying, I like these colors, I don't like these, I want my voice to feel like this. It's like, great, but we got to rewind. We got to get to something a lot more central first. What are your values as a corporation, as an organization, as a human being? What are your values? Because everything else is just an expression of that. So if you get really, really intentional about knowing what are your values as a human being, the way you show up in all those channels, then the only decision you have to make in order to keep that authentic is, how much of myself am I sharing in this moment? Which part of myself am I sharing? And I think that that's a really important thing to remember, because the brand is as much what you do when you're not thinking about it as what you're intentionally putting out to be a thought leader or influencer or X, Y, or Z or a top voice. You know, the brand is, and I think people forget this, the brand is not your color palette. It's not your logo. It's not the kinds of things that you post about. Those are all pieces of the brand. The brand is how you show up in every space, every time. It's the words that you choose in conversation when no one is listening. It's the way you sign your emails. It's the clothes that you choose to wear. It's the tone of voice that you use. It's how you make decisions, just as much as what you post in a public place. These are all part of the brand. So that authenticity that you ask about, I think that's really at the heart of it. It's got to be real to you and who you are, because that brand needs to show up when you're thinking about it and when you're not thinking about it. And the only way to
Yeah,
do that is to be really authentic.
uh, that's the point. So every time we are showing something about us. But in what ways can consistency in messaging and branding contribute to the success of a personal brand?
I love this question, and I was thinking about this over the last couple days in preparation for this talk. And I think that everybody knows for a brand to have weight and be recognizable, it does need to be consistent. But also, if we go back to the first point that we discussed about what the brand is, that it's just an expression of who you are, think about this. Do you want who you are to stay the same for the next 50 to 80 years of your life? Probably not, right? You want to grow and you want to evolve as a person. You should evolve. There should be consistency, but there also needs to be evolution and there needs to be room to play. And I think actually if we look outside of the design world, there is kind of a fundamental misunderstanding of what a brand is or what a brand guide is. I'm comparing a lot to corporate branding because for me it's the same thing. Your personal brand and an organizational brand, it's the same process that you follow. A lot of times I see that a creative team will complete a branding project and they'll publish an artifact of that, which is typically a style guide or a brand book. And maybe they'll put out presentation templates. And then a strange thing happens. The intention of the creative that did that branding work disappears in the way that it gets executed. You see people feeling very worried about breaking the brand guidelines and getting approval on doing things the right way and using exactly the same template with zero changes, zero self-expression over and over and over. And that's not the intention of a brand. A brand ought to be, personally or organizationally, a set of principles and a set of tools from which you continuously create and evolve. And you should play with those things. You should play with, how do my values come out in different situations? What happens when I'm faced with this? How is my brand going to show up differently in a situation that I've never faced before? And that's true personally, and that's true organizationally. So you may not have a personal color palette, or you may, I don't know. Some of us do, not naming names. You may not have a personal color palette, but you may have, you're always going to know, what are those values? What are those things that are core, that are central to me, that no matter what else changes around me, those things are unchanging. We were talking recently in the design leadership team about those anchors, those things that in times of change, what stays the same? What anchors you to who you are and why we're here and why we're all doing what we're doing? So if you know what those things are for your own brand, I would say don't be afraid of playing around with it. That consistency, as long as you're anchored in those values, the consistency will be there. But it doesn't mean that your interests aren't going to evolve over time. You might start, if you're a blogger, you're a writer, you're making posts on LinkedIn, if you're a healthy human being, you're not going to be writing about the same topic week in and week out for 30 years. Like, you're just not. You need to be learning, you need to be growing, you need to let your interests evolve and unfold in a different way. And so I think that everyone knows the importance of consistency, but what I don't hear enough people talking about is actually the importance of being willing to play and say, within this set of parameters, within this set of guidelines that I have for who I am as a human being, let me play with that and let me try things out. And, you may do something, you may take an action, you may make a post, you may have a conversation in a personal moment that is off brand. And you're going to feel that. If you're in tune with your values, you're going to feel that deep down. You're going to go, oh, that's not who I am. That's not who I want to be. And then it's a question of how do you make that right? If it was a personal conversation, if it was a public post, the answer is going to be different. But I would say don't be so paralyzed about what is and isn't in your brand and what is and isn't going to be consistent, that you don't take risks and create and play with it a little bit. So that would be my advice. Like, stay grounded in the values. That's your consistency, and everything else, let it be playful. Have some fun with it.
Having fun makes things soft and easier for us. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. Holly, in your experience, how much do you consider storytelling and creating a compelling narrative important for building a memorable personal brand?
I think it's super important, but maybe not in the way that we assume when we talk about storytelling. I think if you love storytelling, it's usually because it's been something that has had an impact on your life. Maybe you've read a book, or you've seen a film, or you've played a video game where the narrative just like drew you in. You fell in love with the world and the characters and what was going on. That's storytelling. And for people that don't have that experience, I think storytelling often, honestly, just sounds a lot like lying. And so when you think about storytelling as like spinning a narrative, this is where I would say be a little careful. If it starts feeling icky, if it starts feeling like you're promoting something that's not real, or trying to pass yourself off as something that you're not, and you know that, don't do that kind of storytelling. That's not storytelling. That's just lying. We don't want to do that. So when you think about storytelling, again, it's like, dig deep inside yourself. What are your values? What's most important to you? And then it's just about telling that story. So I'm going to give another organizational example, and forgive me, those who have been here for a long time have heard me tell this story, but I joined Avenue Code initially in a marketing role, initially in a role as a freelancer, in fact. And it was something that, as a marketer, most of my career, I had been asked to spin a narrative that downplayed something very ugly, and threw and tried to divert attention to something really good. And that just doesn't really feel great to be doing that in your career. When I came to Avenue Code, it was the first place that I looked around and I just realized these are good people doing good work with integrity, and nobody knows how to talk about that. So that's like a marketer's dream. And the same should be true for your personal life, for your personal brand. Tell the story of what's really good and true and beautiful about yourself. And if you don't have anything to say, then I think you got to actually look at, like, what kind of life choices am I making first before you start telling that story. So storytelling, again, it's showing up authentically with what's true about you. And also, it's okay for that to be a little bit aspirational. We're all human beings. We're never going to be perfect 100% of the time. But think about your highest self. What do you want to be true about you? That's the story that you're telling. And that's the story that you're going to continue to strive to live out in your own life, as much or more, hopefully, than you're talking about that publicly.
Well, that is pretty much impactful. What do you want to be true about you? I think it's
Yeah.
something to think about. And what role does network and building relationship play in establishing and expanding a successful personal brand?
It's a huge role for two reasons. I think once you as a person are really clear about your values and your personal brand, and then you're making that effort of telling it and getting it out there, the only way that that lands or has an impact is when you do, in fact, talk to other human beings. That actualizes it, that makes it real, that makes it impactful. Um, Again, remembering that that might not always look like networking at a professional happy hour. It might not always look like the kinds of posts that you're making. It might also just be, how are you talking with your colleagues day to day? How are you showing up in your home life? How are you showing up in your friendships? That's all part of creating the brand that sticks, that grows, that is real and authentic. But the other part is, and this is just a deeply held belief that I have about what it means to be human. So you take it or leave it. But I believe that the way as human beings we can even know deeply who we are is equal parts self-reflection and relationships. If you think about a friendship that you've lost, or a family member that you've lost, or even a bad breakup that you've gone through, when you miss that person, if you look really deeply really, really deeply at what you miss, you're missing the part of yourself that got actualized because of your relationship with them. There's something about who you are that only got self expressed in that relationship, in that moment of being connected with that human being. People have an amazing ability to bring out elements in one another that they would never be able to see otherwise. So I would say networking it's as important to grow and have your own self knowledge of who you are, who you want to be, what your brand is, what you stand for, just as much as it is about spreading or marketing yourself. So, think about it that way. Think about it. You should always be, number one, yeah, telling your story authentically, but number two, also allowing these moments and these possibilities to know yourself more deeply through those relationships and through those moments. And it doesn't always even need to be a really long or deep conversation or a relationship that spans a lot of time. That can happen if you're truly showing up authentically at a work happy hour, at a conference, in passing conversations, a stranger on the bus. It's still a human being. It's still an opportunity to create a connection, no matter how short, that kind of holds up a mirror and shows you what kind of person are you. I was thinking about this a lot over the weekend because I took my 3-year-old son on a walk at a little lake near our house on Saturday morning. And I watched him watching me in everything that we did. We would pass by someone and I would say, "Good morning." And then he kind of quietly and shyly would say, "Good morning." And I thought, wow, okay, number one, that's a heavy responsibility, right? But number two, like without consciously thinking about it, he's forming into the kind of person that he's going to be. He's forming into the kind of human being that says good morning to strangers on a walk at the lake. That's part of Arthur Camponez's personal brand at 3 years old, and part of that is what he sees me do. Part of it is him deciding, I think I'm going to try that on, see how that feels for me. But I just say that because, again, coming back to this idea of, it comes out in community. It comes out when you're actually out in the world living your real life. That's when the brand has an opportunity to come out. If it just lives in your head as this image of like me as a thought leader, me as an influencer, it's not really a brand in action. Like, a brand in action is a brand that people are reacting to and interacting with. And so that's where your brand comes to life, is in your relationships, in your network, in the way that you relate to others. So I think it's not only an important part, it kind of is the whole thing, is that network and that relationships.
Oh yeah, that brought many thoughts here, many things I wrote down. And we are coming to the end of our conversation. Holly, do you want to share something, some final tips for our audience about personal brand?
I don't want to be a little threatening or creepy, but it's kind of like the Santa Claus thing, right? Like, he's always watching. Nobody may be watching, but your inner self is always watching. So when it comes to your brand, just remember, it's not what you post publicly, it's who you're choosing to be. And that's more for you than anyone else. So I think your personal brand, it's got to matter for yourself personally. Start there and think about what you learn about yourself in community with others.
That's beautiful. Amazing. So Holly, thank you a lot for accepting this invitation to share with us all these good insights. I think everybody here is with the head full of thoughts, full of things to meditate about. And thank you for being here. And thank you all
Thank you so
to
much,
attend.
Hannah. I appreciate
I
the
really,
invitation.